They had some citizen rights, but they had other areas like running for office they could not, the freedmen. Ironically, their children became natural citizens. 1/3 were slaves. And so it was very common for people to have, literally, they could have thousands of slaves in Rome. And so for Paul to use that word in a letter to a people that he had never met, and to call himself a slave, is a pretty significant starting point. He is saying, I'm a slave. Remember, I told you, Paul had a very high status as a Roman citizen. For he to call himself a slave of Jesus Christ is a statement of, this is the posture we are to take as Christians. It's also a statement of our identity is not that which is determined by the state, but that which is determined by our relationship with Jesus. Have you thought about yourself that way? I'm a slave. We talk about Christianity very frequently, about being freed, the freedom of the gospel. Interestingly, I have yet to find many Christians jump to the passages which talk about us being chained in Christ, that we are chained to Christ, that we've been bought with a price, with his blood, and that we are no longer ours. We belong to him. Paul goes on to say in Galatians, I have died. I no longer live, but Jesus lives in me and through me. Do you think of yourself practically on an everyday basis as your identity is a slave? Probably not. I don't. I struggle to. But this is how Paul introduces himself. He introduces himself as a slave of Jesus Christ. And he goes on from there to have a general salutation, but his salutation is a little bit distinct. Before I hit that, though, I want you to look with me, if you will. No, actually, I'm going to have you see in verses 3 through 6, his salutation, which is a normal way of writing letters. Remember I told you we heard about Seneca, we heard about other letters that were written at that time were much shorter. His letter here incorporates some of the terms that are going to be big terms in the rest of the letter. And so I'm not going to take the time to find those for you, but he brings that out in the first few verses of the salutation. And then he says in verse 7, would you read verse 7 aloud, please? Okay, it was very common in Roman letters at that time to use the word greetings. You know, I don't know how you anybody use that in your letters anymore? Greetings? A couple of you do? Greetings. You know, some of us are like, howdy. Hey, you. But whatever would be common today, at that time it was greetings. He does something that's fascinating that some scholars have noted. He actually uses the word that is very close, but it's distinct. Grace. Instead of greetings, he says grace. Now, I'm not sure how that would work, especially if your name is Grace. Can you imagine Grace going around, walking around saying, grace to you? Well, not me, but Grace. You know, it's an oddity here. But this too is Paul being Paul. Grace and peace. What would be the connection for peace? For whom would that have made an immediate connection? There you go, Willie. Yeah, the Jews. What's the Hebrew word? Shalom. So, peace and shalom. Immediately, he's identifying that there are people, and he is talking into who they are. And he speaks to them in such a way that they would have perked up and said, oh, who is this guy? All right, look here how he says in verse 7, to all those in Rome who are loved by God and called to be saints. This is a term, called, which is going to come up back again and again and again. This notion of our identity is something that starts with the one who calls. And again, I'm going to ask you, do you consider yourself someone who has been called? Not someone who has chosen. Not someone who has decided, but someone who has been called. Now, I share that with you because it's such a significant part of Romans, and it will come up in different ways, like in Romans chapter 6, when Paul talks about when we've been baptized into his death. It's almost as if, now, I'm not saying we are puppets. Some people would say, well, there's this divine puppet master who's pulling all the strings. I didn't say that, nor is Paul saying that. But what he is saying is our identity is set by God, not by us. And that's a very good thing. It's important for us to realize when we're having doubts about God. All of us are going to have doubts. But the cool thing is when you say, yeah, but you've been called. He's called you. I don't know, when you think of a voice that was significant in your life that jumps out at you. Hang in there, Kevin, for a moment. When you think about a voice that you would immediately associate with, that comes into your life, whose voice would it be that you would say, oh yeah, that person called me? Who is it? For me, it's my mother. I mean, when my mother's voice called, it was like I knew I was called. Anybody else? It's hard for us. We are raised to think of ourselves as individual, as autonomous, as one unit. That is not consistent with the biblical picture. That is not consistent with the big biblical understanding of our life. We are called. That means there's got to be at least another, right? Who's calling us? Kevin, you had a... Saints is the same thing as slave. How so? Saints, you mean? For you, it's interchangeable. Yeah, well, by the way, that's a great observation. Martin Luther, this was one of his frustrations. He said, you don't die to become a saint. You are simultaneously sinner and saint. And if you think it's because sometimes you're doing good things, oh, that makes you a saint. Sometimes you're doing bad things, you're a sinner. Martin Luther would say, no, you're simul estus. Same time, hang on, Jack, same time you're sinner and saint. Because you're only saint because of God, through his Son. That's what gives us our identity as saints. So absolutely, in the same way, we are only slaves because of our master, Jesus. We are only saints because of Jesus. So that works. Jack. So what I would tell you is I love that story except one little change I'd make. They have an epiphany, and all of a sudden they realize that Jesus found them. See, there is the more biblical understanding that Jesus found me. I once was lost, but now I'm. And the guy who wrote that wrote about his own conversion, a slave trader, by the way, you might note. You should look up the history. So it's absolutely. Paul himself would say, Jesus found me on the road to Damascus. This is important distinction. You will go a whole lot further with your non-believing friends and relatives if you put the focus where the Bible puts it. If you keep putting it on, I found Jesus, you got to find him too. I decided to give my life to Jesus. You've got to give your life too. What does that person feel like immediately? Below you. Right? Because now that person's got to do something to be like you. If you say to that person, I just am so grateful for the gift of faith. Frankly, sometimes I have extraordinary doubts. I wonder, at times I want to throw it all away. But then it's just like, it's almost like he's found me. He keeps me, his spirit keeps me going. He directs me. Do you realize that you have just now put yourself down with that person at their level? And it's such a more significant and frankly truthful statement. This is why Christianity in this country is, one of the reasons is under such attack, is because we've put ourselves in a place of inappropriate relationship with people. We are much closer to sinners than we are to God. And the sooner we realize it, the better off we're going to be. But that's a great, great observation. Paul would say, Jesus found me on the road to Damascus. We're just about out of time, so let me just make sure. Go down to verse 16 and 17, because this is in our reading. We looked at this last week, but this is such an important passage because it's the theme of the whole book. So if you go down to verse 16 and 17, let's read those aloud, please. For I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first and also to the Greek. For in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith for faith, as it is written, the righteous shall live by faith. Undoubtedly, this may come up in your personal study time. You're going to get lost. Don't be shocked. Righteousness, faith to faith, all of this, it will unpack over the next weeks. So let it just come to you and learn as we go. But this passage is so significant because basically if you look at the verse, for it is the power of God, the word for power in the Greek is dynamis. It's the word that we get, dynamis, dynamite. It is the dynamite of God. The gospel is the dynamite of God. And it is this force that is going to be talked about again and again. It is the force, if you were here a few weeks ago when Dr. Kloa said, as a historian, he said, Christianity has changed the world. And it's not because of Christians, it's because of the gospel is the power of God. Christians we've probably caused some challenges along the way, to be frank. That verse 15, just again, it's in the Greek, it's even more passionate. So I am eager to preach the gospel to you also who are in Rome. And this image is he wants to come to them to give them a gift. We're out of time, so I can't get into more details. But you're going to go off in your groups. We're going to be back here at 11:15. And so I'll ring the bell to help you find your way. Our facilitators this week, we have our good Laura back this week. Put your hand up, Laura. And Brenda's here. Put your hand up. All right. And David, you're here. And then filling in for Andrew, who's away this week, we have John. Where are you at, John? John, in the back. So those that go to Andrew, go follow John. Have a great study time together. We'll see you back in a bit. We want you to know that our groups are in session right now for about 45 minutes, so you're welcome to fast forward through this, and after about 45 minutes, we'll come back together and introduce next week's lesson and answer a couple of questions. Thank you very much. back, bring it back. We got to move. We got 14 minutes, so come on in and let's knock out a couple of things. It's always great to see you like each other. Good, come on in. What'd you guys do? Run Willie off? He's gone. All right. Huh? Main Street Cafe. That's lunch today? All right, for those fellas, is that just the guys or are there gals? Just guys. Okay, well, Joe's sitting back there. Yeah, I was gonna say, you better be careful. All right, sit down, Miss Janet, thank you. And Joe, Miss Joe, come on in. And let's, first of all, you're getting to know each other. And are there some questions that came up in your group that you're saying, let's ask Pastor Jeff that? Did anything come up in your group that rises to the point of asking a question? No? Looks like you rolled right through it today. Well, the first week, just to be candid, is a cakewalk compared to where we're going next week. And I want to give you a little bit of help in your reading for next week. And so what I'd like you to do, if you would, is grab hold of this. All of you should have one of these. If you do not, we'll make sure to get one for you. And if you look at it, it's called the Enrichment Magazine Study Guide. And so it should be in your folder, the Enrichment Magazine Study Guide. While you're doing that, I want to remind you, how did Paul introduce himself to these people he had not met? He introduced himself as a slave. I know you like to use, it's a whole lot, it seems just so much more acceptable to use the word servant. But actually, it's the word slave. It's a class of society. It is a group that was identifiable. And I bring that to you because this isn't the only letter he does it. He brings it elsewhere, as does James, by the way. But the reason I bring that to you is because I think how you go into the next reading will be a challenge, because if you cannot see yourself the way God sees you, you will not be able to do well with this next reading. So, how does God see you?
Lost and condemned.
So, how does God see you? Sinner, lost and condemned? How does God see you, Kevin? Beloved child, made in his image. How does God see you? Sinner and saint. That's probably what I would suggest to you is got to be the starting point. And I bring that to you because if you can identify with the place like Paul does of saying, I'm a slave, that just evicts all kinds of imagery, then you're probably going to work your way to be able to say, I'm a sinner. And if you're wondering, how to go into this next reading, The best way to go into this next reading is to keep that phrase, sinner and saint, before you, as long as you understand saint is not about you doing something good. Now you're a saint. You're a saint because of Christ. And the way that I would suggest is when you start this section, go to chapter 3. And in chapter 3, it starts in verse 9. Chapter 3, what then? Are we Jews any better off? Not at all. For we have already charged that all, both Jews and Greeks, are under sin. As it is written, none is righteous, no, not one. No one understands, no one seeks God. All have turned aside. Together they have become worthless. No one does good, not even one. And he goes forward, it gets worse. And it would be good for you to read this, because if you cannot accept chapter 3, you're going to be in the wrong place in chapter 2. You will find your favorite sin, and you will amplify it. And you will miss out on the fact that Paul starts bringing up all of these examples to show what he says in chapter 3. Does this make sense, what I'm saying? That in chapter 3, he makes the general statement, we're all broken. In chapter 2, he starts giving us examples of that brokenness. And in this magazine, I think this is a really nice read, and I would recommend it to you. And I would recommend it to you because it will get you, it will challenge you. It will challenge you to look at all of these different examples of brokenness. And it has exhibit A, creation. It has exhibit B, idolatry. It has exhibit C, homosexuality. And each one of them speaks to how the sinner and the saint is real, that we're all sinful, we all are under the law. And so when you will go into this, it's kind of funny, the author of the study guide says, this is not going to be fun. Who of us likes to be told that we make mistakes? Who of us likes to be shown where we're not what we want to be? And I would just tell you, instead of personalizing this, instead of making this about those people or this person, just read it as a description of what had really happened when sin came into the world in Genesis chapter 2 and 3. In 2, we see this beautiful picture. In chapter 3, everything is broken. But we really don't have a sense of the brokenness until we see chapter 4, when Cain takes the life of his brother. But that doesn't happen in our family. It's not until you continue to read through the scriptures that we start to realize that the brokenness is pervasive. So I actually had a couple of people tease me and say, hey, Pastor, I won't be there next week. Don't do that. Come into this together and let's wrestle together, not about ourselves, but wrestle with the reality of where we're at in a broken world, where we can talk about it and we can wrestle with it together. I'm looking forward to having some teaching time. I'll probably have less time with you guys together next week. Don't take that wrong, because I want you to have time together, but I also want to give you some time to ask questions. And so we'll have more time next week for asking questions for us to wrestle through. The good news is chapter 2 gives way to chapter 3, and chapter 4, as I said, it's really important for us to see how Paul is building in the letter a picture of who God is and how God is at work in our lives. So with that, The magazine has other great articles, but that article might be helpful just for you to read as you come into conversation with each other. So I think it's time to call it good and to close in the family of prayer. We were able to tape today, so if you are thinking, oh, it'd be good to go back and watch it, you can find it on our YouTube channel. Lord, remember us in your kingdom and teach us to pray. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. All right, I'll hang around after if you have a couple of questions, but I'm going to be walking to meet with our facilitators, so don't hold them up too long. But if you have something you want to grab me with, feel free to. Lastly, this weekend, important weekend, the president and CEO of the Lutheran Church Charities. I mean, there are thousands of churches in the country. There are hundreds of churches that have comfort dog ministry, and that's just one of their different arms of ministry. He won't be back soon. I mean, this is like a one-time dealio. So I would recommend you set aside and make sure you come. He's going to present in Bible class about this work that goes on internationally and nationally. It's, you know, there are so many newscasts. I've been watching the newscasts that talk about the comfort dog, these comfort dogs were here for that tragedy. And it's just a powerful witness of God's work that we have going on right here. And so come, his name is Chris Singer. I believe his wife is named Jeanette. And so Chris and Jeanette are gonna have just one night. They've got to get back, so they're coming on Saturday, going home on Sunday, but we'll have a little bit of time with them come this Sunday. And it'll probably look like it does today. We're still in process, so be patient, help others to be patient too. Have a great day.